Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. For the purposes of discussion board one, the book I chose was American Zion, Old Testament as a Political Text from the Revolution to the Civil War, written by Aaron Shelley. Here he compares George Washington to the Israelite judge Gideon, and he points out similarities in both figures. Both of them have virtue, and both refuse to become king after battlefield victories. Now, in early America, there's a comparison of virtue to Greco Roman examples in history, looking at republicanism specifically in the Roman Empire, and also with the Greeks. Now, less noticed are examples from the Bible, and I think that has something to do with our secular culture today, where we tend to look at anything but Christian examples. More to follow on that. And he points out the significance of the knowledge that Americans had of the Bible in understanding their political and intellectual outlook on the history of the United States. Now, he points out that classical republicanism of that period in America had an added element of biblical narratives, which shows the significance of the Bible. Now, he points out the debates that the liberals at the time looked at the rights, liberties, and they sought to preserve those as well. The classic Republicans, on the other hand, looked at liberty, virtue, and public duty, something that we're kind of seeing in the limelight today, especially with the recent elections and the debates regarding that. So he points out that very few Americans at the time had a classical education in terms of learning about the Greeks and the Romans. Generally, that was reserved for the wealthy. However, he pointed out that biblical republicanism enabled every literate American to come to terms with civic humanism with the use of well-known Old Testament structures, narratives, forms, and metaphors. Now, he uses the examples of the story of Exodus and how American colonists saw themselves as the Israelites leaving the British Egypt at that time, and how God delivered them out away from the quote-unquote British bondage. Now, he also points out corruption as a problem that undermines the virtue of the young republic. Looking at examples from Greece and Rome and how American colonists applied that to their time. But they also applied examples from the Bible as well. One of the stories that he looks at is the book of Esther, how he talks about Mordecai and Esther and King Xerxes and the evil Haman. He also looks at the example of King David's inappropriate relationship with Bathsheba as an example of how virtue can be destroyed in a republic. So, a couple key examples that he points out to reinforce the significance of the Old Testament in American colonists' collective minds at that time. Now, one of the other articles I looked at is The Revolutionary Gospel According to Sam Adams, written by Ira Snell. Now, she points out the situation, the context at the time, where the Continental Army had suffered a major defeat at the Battle of Brandywine. And Sam Adams, who is one of the major proponents of the American Revolution, had to rally all of his delegates, and he used the concept of service and the concept of fighting for liberty as a service to God, pointing out that we must do so in order to be faithful to God. Now, he also points out examples in the Boston Gazette of where Sam Adams tried to foment a sort of fear of potentially the Church of England taking over, trying to rally American colonists to his cause. Now, another article I looked at was Pulpits of Revolution by Christopher Pearl, where he talks about how clergy took on and he spoke about the Enlightenment principles when seeking independence from Great Britain. And an example that he uses is Patrick Henry, and how Patrick Henry was able to articulate how the British government broke a sacred contract, so therefore it was justified that the American colonists would seek to break away. Now, he also looks at the Presbyterians' role in the American Revolution, and he also points out examples such as the Reverend Francis Allison and examples such as God's law and the law of charity in informing the rationale for why American colonists undertook the revolution. And the last article I looked at was by William Grobin, Republican Religion and American Churches in Early National. Um, and he points out the fusion of biblical and secular history. Now, he points out a patriot must uphold the morality of his community in order to ensure its freedom. And he goes on to describe how Baptists, Presbyterians, Congregationalists, Episcopalians all try to make a case for why their denomination specifically were perfect advocates for American liberty, looking at the organization of their congregations and their church structure in equating them to republicanism. Ladies and gentlemen, please give me your feedback. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you.